modern Western world, beheading as a form of human execution is fairly rare. But in certain parts of the world, and certainly throughout human history, beheadings were performed by the thousands, at least. At face value, it could be pretty easy to assume that death by decapitation is one of the least horrific ways to die, all things considered. But what if it's not? During the French Revolution, the guillotine was the preferred method of execution. At the time, it was believed to be the most humane method of capital punishment, especially when you consider the alternatives, such as breaking on the wheel, in which the victim is tied to a circular wheel as the executioner smashes their bones with a blunt weapon. Alternatively, those condemned to death could be burned alive, boiled to death, or systematically dismembered depending on the exact nature of their crimes. So decapitation is certainly a fast death relative to the aforementioned alternatives, but even that is assuming you get lucky. After all, before the common adoption of the guillotine, an executioner was often employed to do the beheading manually. It wasn't uncommon for a drunk or inexperienced executioner to require 4 or 5 strokes of his axe to get the job done. It was even considered smart for the family of the victim to bribe the executioner to carefully sharpen his blade prior to their execution to make sure their end is quick. In that sense, the widespread adoption of the guillotine was widely considered an act of equality, as the wealth of the criminal was no longer a factor in the painlessness of their beheading. So for as long as beheadings have taken place, there's been the question of whether or not one remains conscious after the beheading has occurred, which is known as lucid decapitation. There are lots of reports from participants in the crowds during the French Revolution who claim to see the removed heads blinking and making facial expressions well after the head is separated from the body. One of the most well-documented cases of potential post-decapitation consciousness occurred in 1905 and involves a prisoner named Henri Languille. Immediately following Languille's execution, a French physician called Dr. Bureau made some interesting observations. The following report is taken directly from Dr. Bureau's notes. Here, then, is what I was able to note immediately after the decapitation. The eyelids and lips of the guillotined man worked in irregularly rhythmic contractions for about 5 or 6 seconds. This phenomenon has been remarked by all those finding themselves in the same conditions as myself for observing what happens after the severing of the neck. I waited for several seconds. The spasmodic movements ceased. It was then that I called in a strong, sharp voice, "Languille." I saw the eyelids slowly lift up, without any spasmodic contractions. I insist advisedly on this peculiarity, but with an even movement, quite distinct and normal, such as happens in everyday life, with people awakened or torn from their thoughts. Next, Languille's eyes very definitely fixed themselves on mine, and the pupils focused themselves. I was not, then, dealing with a sort of vague, dull look without any expression that can be observed any day in dying people to whom one speaks. I was dealing with undeniably living eyes which were looking at me. After several seconds, the eyelids closed again. It was at that point that I called out again, and, once more, without any spasm, slowly, the eyes lifted and undeniably living eyes fixed themselves on mine with perhaps even more penetration than the first time. Then there was a further closing of the eyelids, but now less complete. I attempted the effect of a third call. There was no further movement, and the eyes took on the glazed look which they have in the dead. So at least according to Dr. Bureau, it appears that a decapitated human being remains conscious for at least 30 seconds following the removal of their head. At face value, 30 seconds may not sound like a particularly long time, but I cannot imagine the confusion and horror one would experience, seeing the world spinning before their eyes before their head hits the ground, gradually realizing what's just taken place as the blood slowly drains from the head and the vision steadily fades to black. As if that wasn't bad enough, this next story takes this nightmare fuel to the next level. The following account is written by a U.S. Army veteran who was stationed in Korea in June 1989 when the taxi that he and his friend were riding in collided with a truck. His friend was decapitated. My friend's head came to rest face up and, from my angle, upside down. As I watched, his mouth opened and closed no less than 2 times. The facial expressions he displayed were first of shock or confusion, followed by terror or grief. I cannot exaggerate and say that he was looking all around, but he did display ocular movement in that his eyes moved from me to his body and back to me. He had direct eye contact with me when his eyes took on a hazy, absent expression, and he was dead. So not only was this person decapitated, but his head landed at just the right angle that he was able to see his own headless corpse. That is horrifying. In conclusion, it sounds like it really is possible to retain some degree of consciousness after being beheaded. I suppose it does make sense on some level. If the decapitation process is quick and clean, the brain itself will still be full of blood as the head hits the ground. And without a heart to pump that blood out, the only force pulling the blood out of the brain is gravity, potentially leaving that head conscious for up to 30 seconds as the blood drains away. And on that bright note, thank you for watching.